Today on the Daily Dose, Jacques Cartier. Born in 1491 Saint-Malo, France, Jacques Cartier learned to sail as a young man, most likely voyaging to Brazil and Newfoundland, under the command of Italian explorer Giovanni da Verrazzano, before Cartier's historic 3 voyages to the New World. 2 years after the Duchy of Brittany was made part of France in the Edict of Union, in 1534, King Francis I commissioned Cartier on an expedition to the Northern Islands, as the east coast of North America was then known, with the objective of finding a northwest passage to the lucrative trade markets of Asia, setting sail in April with 2 ships and a crew of 61 men. Exploring the west coast of Newfoundland, the St. Lawrence River and Prince Edward Island, giving rise to the name Canada when he misinterpreted the Iroquois word for settlement, Cartier returned to France with 2 captured Native Americans, minus any fresh knowledge of the still elusive Northwest Passage. The following year, the French king sent Cartier back across the Atlantic, this time with 3 ships and 110 men, employing his 2 captured Native Americans as guides for a more in-depth exploration of today's eastern coast of Canada, sailing up the St. Lawrence River as far as present-day Quebec, where he established a base camp to wait out what would prove to be a bitter winter of deprivation and death. By spring, 25 members of Cartier's crew had died from scurvy, while the once friendly Iroquois people turned against the French explorer when they concluded that his sole intention was to lay claim to their native lands. To deepen the bad blood with local Iroquois, Cartier kidnapped 2 chiefs before sailing home to France. Delayed by war in Europe until 1541, King Francis funded Cartier's 3rd voyage to the New World, 2 months in advance of nobleman Jean-François Roberval, who was charged with establishing a permanent colony in the Northern Islands. Arriving at present-day Quebec in August of that same year, Cartier and his crew endured another brutal winter, and when Roberval failed to show up at their planned rendezvous site, Cartier set sail for France with what he thought was a valuable cache of gold and diamonds, a bounty that later proved to be nothing more than worthless minerals. Encountering Roberval during a stop in Newfoundland, Cartier defied Roberval's orders to return to Quebec, instead setting sail for home under the cover of night. The decision ended Cartier's time as a French explorer, spending the rest of his life at his estate in Saint-Malo before passing away on September 1st, 1557, making Jacques Cartier an important trailblazer during the Age of Exploration. John Cabot. Born Giovanni Cabot in 1450 Genoa, John Cabot moved to Venice as a young man, where he worked the spice trade in the Levant or Eastern Mediterranean. Studying navigation and map-making during his merchant years, like his contemporary Christopher Columbus, Cabot became intrigued in the possibility of reaching the rich markets of Asia by sailing in a westerly direction. Moving to Valencia and later Seville, possibly due to outstanding debts, Cabot worked as a maritime engineer with varying degrees of success, moving to the British port city of Bristol in late 1495, where he worked tirelessly to convince the British Crown that a shorter route to Asia was possible by sailing a more northerly heading than the one Columbus had taken. After King Henry VII issued letters patent to Cabot and his son in 1496, Cabot set sail on a small caravel named Matthew in May of 1947 with a crew of 18, following an aborted first attempt in 1496. Making landfall in America on June 24th, the first European to do so since Leif Erikson's 11th century landfall. While the exact location of Cabot's explorations have been disputed, many pointing to southern Labrador, the island of Newfoundland, or Cape Breton Island, Cabot was the first to hoist both the English and Venetian flags on North American soil. Believing he had reached Asia's northeast coast, Cabot explored the region now known as the Cabot Strait, naming such points of interest as Cape Discovery, the island of St. John, and the Grand Banks off the east coast of Canada, where his crew caught an abundance of codfish by simply dipping baskets into the water. After his return to England, in late 1497, Cabot set sail on a second expedition in February of 1498, this time with 5 ships and 300 men, with plans to continue westward past his original landfalls, with an expectation of reaching Japan. While one caravel was forced to land in Ireland due to storm damage, many historians believe that Cabot and his remaining crew perished in a severe storm, while some evidence suggests that Cabot and his crew may have lived out their lives in North America. Other documents suggest that he and his crew quietly returned to England amongst precious little fanfare. What is known is that Cabot's proof of a shorter route to the New World was the spark of discovery behind Britain's future land claims in Canada, as well as the establishment of Britain's 13 colonies in North America, making John Cabot an influential figure during the Age of Exploration. Samuel de Champlain. Born in 1574 Bruges, France, Samuel de Champlain traveled to Spain and the West Indies with his uncle, before accepting a job as a cartographer for King Henry IV from 1601 to 1603. Sailing to Canada in 1603, under the command of François Gravé Dupont, the group sailed up the St. Lawrence and Saguenay rivers, further exploring the Gaspé Peninsula before arriving into Montreal. Proving his usefulness on Dupont's expedition, in 1604, Champlain was named geographer on an expedition to Acadia under the command of Lieutenant General Pierre du Gardemont, exploring present-day Nova Scotia, the Bay of Fundy, and the St. John River, before building a fort on a small island atop the St. Croix River to wait out the winter months. In the summer of 1605, Dumont's team sailed down the coast of New England to Cape Cod, where Champlain became the first European explorer to write a detailed accounting of present-day Plymouth, Massachusetts, a solid 15 years before English pilgrims settled in the region. Advancing to the rank of lieutenant under Dumont, in 1608, the group again explored the St. Lawrence, building a fort at present-day Quebec City, which would soon become the teeming heart of the French fur trade. Voyaging deep into the Canadian interior in 1615, Champlain and his team of Huron people attacked the Iroquois, resulting in the aggressors' defeat when Champlain took an arrow to the knee. Unable to walk, Champlain wintered with the Hurons near Georgian Bay, composing one of the most detailed accounts of its time of Native American life. Returning to France to face a withering string of lawsuits, Champlain composed a number of accounts of his voyages, replete with maps and illustrations, returning to Canada after his commission was reinstated, with a new wife 30 years his junior. Appointed governor of New France by Louis XIII's chief minister, Cardinal Richelieu, French control of the lucrative Canadian fur trade was soon displaced by the English, who lay siege to the fort until Champlain surrendered on July 19, 1629. Returning to France until the signing of the Treaty of Saint-Germain-en-Laye, which handed Quebec back to the French, Champlain returned to Quebec yet again as its governor, retiring in 1633 due to failing health, before passing away on Christmas Day, 1635, making the life and voyages of Samuel de Champlain a keystone figure during the Age of Exploration. The Battle of Quebec. During the 7 Years' War of 1756 to 1763, fought on 3 continents between France and Britain and their respective allied nations, while France was preoccupied with hostilities in Europe, Britain focused its efforts on French colonies in the New World in the hope of unseating France as a commercial rival. Appointed commander after capturing Fort Louisbourg on Cape Breton Island, on June 27, 1759, British General James Wolfe landed some 11,000 men on the southern banks of the St. Lawrence River in several positions across from Quebec City in present-day Canada, then known as New France, closing in on a French force of some 18,000 men, including indigenous warriors of the Seven Nations. Forcing a French retreat from Beauport on July 31st, Wolfe sent Brigadier General James Murray against a French supply depot and ships some 40 miles upriver from Quebec, effectively cutting off supplies to the fortified city, at the same time cutting off all French retreat or refortification options from Montreal. Landing before dawn on September 13th, 4,500 light infantrymen, led by Colonel William Howe, scrambled up the cliffs at Les Orphelins, subduing an advance guard of French troops before crossing the Plains of Abraham toward Quebec. Shortly after sunrise, indigenous marksmen laid down sporadic fire against the advancing British, until lesser-trained French forces under the command of Marquis de Montcalm fired upon one another from a mere 120 feet apart, taking the life of General Wolfe, while Montcalm would succumb to his own wounds the following day. After several more key British officers were felled in battle, British Brigadier General George Townshend solidified command, while a French relief force under Colonel Bougainville called a retreat, giving the British a consolidated position on the Plains of Abraham. After the French army retreated yet again under the cover of darkness, the British lay siege to Quebec City, forcing France to surrender the city on September 18th, after French military leaders signed articles of capitulation. The Battle of Quebec, also known as the Battle of the Plains of Abraham, witnessed British casualties of 58 killed and 600 wounded, while the French bore losses of 166 killed, 600 wounded, and 350 captured, and while the war for New France would continue until the signing of the Treaty of Paris on February 1, 1763, obliging France to hand Canada over to Great Britain, the Battle of Quebec proved to be a critical turning point in Britain's ongoing push to wrest the French from North America. The Great Acadian Expulsion. Migrating to Nova Scotia from the rural Vendée region of France in search of a better life, the Acadians began settling in Acadie along the Bay of Fundy, a region with the highest tidal fall in the world. But when the sovereignty of their land moved into British hands after the 1713 signing of the Treaty of Utrecht, by 1730, British authorities forced the Acadians to swear their neutrality in any further conflicts between the constantly warring British and the French. In the years that followed, the Acadians' fate became increasingly tenuous when Britain and France undertook a game of hegemony by building forts and naval bases a mere stone's throw away from each other. When Fort Beausejour fell to English forces in June of 1755, British Governor Charles Lawrence noted some 279 Acadian militia among the defeated, and when Acadians refused an oath of British allegiance the following month, Lawrence ordered their deportation from Nova Scotia, a move well received by recent immigrants from New England who coveted the Acadians' fertile lands. On September 5, 1755, Colonel John Winslow ordered all Acadian males 10 years or older to assemble at a church in Grand Pré, the heart of Acadian Nova Scotia, informing them of the confiscation of their lands, homes, and livestock, while New Englander Charles Morris devised a plan to surround the church with like-minded men before breaching dikes and burning Acadian homes and crops. By the fall of 1755, Acadians were forced to board ships bound for Pennsylvania, Georgia, South Carolina, New France, Cape Breton, and the northwestern headwaters of the Petitcodiac River. Between 1755 and 1763, some 10,000 Acadians were forcibly removed from British-held Nova Scotia, many dying from disease, starvation, and squalid conditions aboard ships, forcing Acadians to wander North America in search of missing loved ones and peace-loving places to live. Although the Acadians were never shipped to Louisiana by their British oppressors, many were drawn to the French possession due to a commonality of language and culture, beginning the steady migration of Acadians into Acadia, as it is now known, well into the 1820s. Throughout their tragic ordeal, Acadians managed to hold on to their sense of heritage and identity, as reflected in the music, language, and food still prevalent in Cajun Louisiana to this day, displaying a remarkable resilience of human will in the face of abject inhumanity displayed by the British, making the Great Acadian Expulsion another low-water moment in human history. The Hudson's Bay Company. As fur coats, stoles, and beaver hats became all the rage in 17th century Europe, Prince Rupert of England convinced his cousin King Charles II, along with several merchants and wealthy noblemen, to give the Hudson's Bay Company exclusive fur trading rights to the region of Hudson Bay and her vast river tributaries that dissect much of present-day Canada. Known as Rupert's Land, the Hudson's Bay Company was officially chartered on May 2, 1670, 2 years after the company's first ships, the Eaglet and the Nonsuch, were dispatched into the region to establish trading posts, mainly at the mouths of major rivers that fed into the bay, which during the summer months drew native peoples to the posts to trade furs for European goods, ranging from tools, guns, textiles, and foods, including the now iconic point blanket. Trading in coins known as made beaver, each coin was valued as the equivalent of one prime male beaver pelt. Beyond the lethal impact of foreign diseases on native populations, the practice of fur trading encouraged natives to abandon their traditional way of life for a heavy reliance on European goods for their survival, prompting outbreaks of intertribal violence when native fur trappers moved out of their traditional territories in search of fur-bearing animals. The company also faced stiff competition from the French in southern Rupert's Land until the 1713 Treaty of Utrecht acknowledged England's exclusive claim to the Hudson Bay region. Other competitors soon followed in the name of the Northwest Company until the two competitors were formally merged in 1821, which extended their trapping and trading monopoly into the Northwest Territories. Now considered the oldest continuously operated retail company in North America, the privately held Hudson's Bay Company now owns and operates some 239 department stores in Canada and the United States, some 40 million square feet of retail space, including Hudson's Bay, Saks Fifth Avenue, and Saks Off Fifth, as well as The Bay, which is a Canadian e-commerce marketplace for luxury goods. Under the banner of HBC Properties and Investments, the company's real estate and investment portfolio business, the company manages the real estate and tangible assets of each independent division, including its property development division, Streetworks Development, making the Hudson's Bay Company an enduring mainstay in North American history. Today on the Daily Dose, the Klondike Gold Rush. After gold was discovered on a tributary of the Yukon River during the summer of 1896, when news reached the States a year later, more than 100,000 stampeders, as they became known, descended on the frigid river that runs through northwestern Canada and parts of Alaska. In an attempt to thwart the ignorant about the challenges that lay ahead, Canadian authorities required each stampeder to carry a 1-year supply of necessities into the region, including 1,000 pounds of food, before boarding ships in the port cities of the Pacific Northwest for a journey north to the Alaskan town of Skagway, before traversing the White Pass Trail or the Daya Trail, which took them to the Chilkoot Trail. No matter which trail a stampeder chose, the journey was frigid and daunting at best, taking the lives of thousands of miners and more than 3,000 pack animals who perished on the White Pass Trail, soon earning the nickname Dead Horse Trail. Even more pack animals would be abandoned when the stampeders reached the icy slopes of the Chilkoot Trail, known as the Golden Staircase, a treacherous passage that turned back the majority of money-hungry men. Thousands more would perish during the 500-mile boat ride along the Yukon River to Dawson City, Canada, the heart of the gold rush, which soon boiled over into a sanitary nightmare rife with sickness, disease, and death. Of the 30,000 stampeders who made it all the way to Dawson, most returned home empty-handed, save for a fortunate few, while still others, much like the California gold rush that came before it, took advantage of Dawson's lack of infrastructure by opening saloons, supply stores, brothels, boarding houses, and more. Of the few lucky miners who made it rich in the Klondike, all of them early stakeholders, their strikes infused some 75 tons of gold into the American economy, helping a nation recover from a depression that followed the Panic of 1893. The Klondike Gold Rush also introduced foreign diseases like smallpox into native populations, at the same time decimating the local environment with soil erosion, water contamination, deforestation, and loss of native wildlife, making the Klondike Gold Rush a time of greed-inspired deprivation and death. And there you have it, the Klondike Gold Rush, today on the Daily Dose. If you enjoyed this short educational video, consider giving the filmmakers a YouTube super thanks from as little as $1, so that you too can feed the filmmakers who feed your brain.